Welcome to this week's Fireside Chat with Jesse. I am joined today by Mike Jones, President of Business Capital at CIT. Thanks for joining me, Mike.
Great to be here, Jesse. Thank you.
No, I appreciate your time, sir. And I don't know if you've watched many of these or not, but Deb Rubin last year actually interviewed me. And she asked me who the one person I wanted to have on this was, and you were that person. So
really?
super excited when you agreed to sit down with me today, Mike. So thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for the people who might not be familiar with yourself, Mike, do you mind just kind of giving an overview of your career to date in equipment finance?
Sure. So I started in equipment finance back in 1996 with business credit leasing, which was probably one of the largest independents at the time, owned by Swans company, which happened to be a frozen food company, privately held, family run, really great operation. And then ultimately they sold to US Bank. I stayed for about another 4 or 5 years. Culture changed dramatically from a family owned and operated organization to a very public, large, very well branded bank. And so I decided to leave after about 8, 9 years and went over to a startup, USXL. Jim McGrain had tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I wanted to be a part of building something special, getting away from the bank and driving independent growth. And the 10 of us got together. We had a folding table, folding chairs, a brown phone, and one printer at the time, and started building out the foundation of the platform. And within about 5 months, we were originating transactions, and it was probably the hardest work that I've had in my life outside of being in the military, but it was certainly the most rewarding. It was our child that we built from 10 to just about 300 people over a pretty short period of time. I grew it to about $3 billion. And then we ran out of space with our equity provider, DLJ, and ultimately ended up partnering with and really being acquired by Tigris, which was about a $2 billion firm at the time. And we were off to the races, Jesse. It was amazing. And that was probably about 2007. So for about a year, we were looking to acquire everything and anything. And it's kind of funny looking back on it now, because somewhere along the line, we got it in our mind that we were going to buy the GE Capital vendor finance portfolio. and talk about the minnow swallowing the whale. Fortunately, we were smart enough to not go down that path. And then 2008 hit, and it became a whole different story. We had to shut down our customers. I think at that time, I had to notify close to 280 customers that we just couldn't fund them anymore. We just didn't have the cash. The securitization market just evaporated overnight. So a lot of lessons learned there, but fortunately we had 2 suitors, Everbank being one of them. And they came in and said, we're buying the portfolio. We love the portfolio, but we're ambivalent to your business. And we really don't know if we want to be in vendor finance. And that's when we all kind of just sat back and go, wow, this is something that we've been really invested in, and, it could go away. Fortunately, we convinced them that it would be a good thing. And we were off to the races again. And I can remember Jim coming to me and saying, listen, Mike, you got to double the business in the next 3 years. And I said, who are we acquiring? No, all grassroots.
Party of you.
Yeah, it's on me. So, and we did, and we did because we had a great partner with Everbank. The brand wasn't really nationally recognized at the time, but when they started to put their name on the Jaguar Stadium, people started to figure out who Everbank was, and that was helpful as well. And they were a great partner up until the point that they sold the TIAA, and then the culture changed again. And so, given the opportunity to come back to Jacksonville, and I'd spent a lot of time in Jacksonville through Everbank, I came to CIT. And what brought me to CIT really was the diversity of the people that were here, the diversity of leadership, which I had not seen in most of the places that I've worked with in the past. And then the other thing that was really interesting was the technology that they were deploying. They really felt like they were a technology company disguised as a bank. And that's how the equipment finance group was going to market, and still does today. So we've been transforming, going through another large transformation on our workflow. And it's been, particularly the last 90 days, it's been more fun than I've had in a long, long time.
That's great. I mean, there's so many things that you touched on during that little overview there. I mean, first of all, the swans. I mean, it's amazing how many people have started with that particular thing, then the US Bank, and then similar, like they just matriculated out and they wanted to go do their own things because they didn't really like the culture.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how many companies have come from, the little yellow truck that drives around your neighborhood, and you're like, oh, those potatoes are so good, but they're so bad for you.
And I'll tell you, some of the best people, and I keep in contact with, we're still friends today, 20 years later, and they're just a great group of people. The culture in Marshall, Minnesota is unlike a lot of places. It's really something special.
Yeah, it's just the drive to get there is a little daunting. It's like, where am I going? The other thing is the culture. That's why I left my first two organizations, was just the culture shift, going from more of like a customer centric focus to more revenue centric. Yeah. And at the end of the day, yes, we need to be profitable, but it's also like you need to make sure to do the right things by customers too. So that's why I'm on my third organization in equipment finance. So USXL was actually a customer of mine when I was at OSG in Englewood, New Jersey.
No kidding.
So I want to say that was 2006. When Donna Walsh and Dennis Stipokowski were like my main.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Good people. Dennis is probably one of the most intelligent folks that I've been working with. Gosh, I'm thinking back. We met in 2003, started working together in 2004, and the technology that he built, and he had a good team to help him. I mean, he didn't put it all on his shoulders, but just a brilliant individual.
No, it's fantastic. It was almost one of those things where at the time I was 25. Okay. And it's like, how can I have an intelligent conversation with this guy who knows every single thing and anticipates what I'm saying? It was like, just going to let him talk and just tell me what to do.
But I did well, Jesse.
So from a CIT perspective, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the organization, but what kind of business channels are you guys in? Ticket sizes, volume?
Sure. So we're in office imaging, we're in technology, we're in industrial. We've got our small business solutions group, which is out of Portsmouth. We have our lender finance group, which is housed here in Jacksonville. And then we have our insurance services group that all reside in business capital today. In Portsmouth, a little bit smaller ticket, probably average ticket there is around 35,000, but they go all the way down to 2,500. So if you think of Portsmouth, it's really your small businesses. It's Larry the landscaper, and then as we migrate down toward Jacksonville, it's more of the corporate underwriting that we do here. So average ticket here is closer to 100,000, but we've gone up to probably the largest transaction would have been about $50 million with the investment grade credit here over the last year. So it's a pretty broad group, but I would say that 95% of what we do is under $250,000.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, was that Direct Capital? Was that the Portsmouth acquisition? They were a customer of mine back in the day too, and they had quite the sales operation.
It's amazing, Jesse. We the same leadership probably when you work with them is there today, and we've got 4 sales managers up there that just are absolutely amazing. We've made it, I've made it difficult on them over the years, particularly in 19 when we had the trucking blip, and certainly in COVID. Never once a complaint. They just bear down and they get it done. In fact, this month I got updated this morning. It was the best month that they've had since inception.
Wow.
So they've taken it from basically ashes and are just absolutely on fire right now. So really good group. I couldn't be luckier with that team.
No, that's amazing. And plus it's a nice place to visit about 4 months out of the year.
Yes.
But if you're like me, I moved from New Jersey to Arizona, and I find myself in like Buffalo in like February and January. So I'm sure you can probably relate to some of those travelers. Why am I going there now?
March is a tough time to be in Portsmouth for sure. I'll be there in 2 weeks when it starts to warm up. At least get into the 50s.
That's fair. So as far as like the shift into like the pandemic, like how did that impact yourself, your team, like you personally, like your team shifting? I'm sure you've been in an office pretty much your entire life, and then shifting from home. Like, do you mind just kind of talking about that experience, Mike?
It was a fire drill for sure, Jesse. We never had any of our associates remote other than our regional sales managers. So maybe 70 out of 650-ish. And to get them overnight remote, it was it was a heavy task. And I was actually surprised how quickly our technology team was able to stand our people up from home. And it was a struggle. We didn't have all the equipment we needed. It took us time to get dual screens from the office to the home environment. A lot of folks didn't have the space. So, you know, it was first couple of months was tough, but for good or evil, there wasn't a whole lot of business to do in the first 3 months, right? Everything was virtually shut down. And we had to drive all our attention to PPP and deferral programs. So we, you know, the one thing that I was faced with is, you know, do you shut the business down? Do you furlough people for a period of time? And there are, you know, there were companies that did that. I elected not, because in my mind, this thing wasn't going to be a 2-year thing. In my mind, this was going to be a 90-day thing at best, right? So we redeployed all of our originators. At that time, we probably had about 170, and we deployed them to work on helping our customers get into the deferral program, working with them on, you know, structuring payments where we needed to, just really end user customer focused and vendor focused, but the real need was with the end user customers. When things started to come back to some sense of normalcy, which would have been probably about June, that's when I came back to the office. Working from home for me was not an option. My wife was at home at the same time. For those folks that had kids that they were trying to educate, I don't know how they did it. God bless them, because after 90 days of listening to my wife yell at the television, I had to get back to the office. So we started, you know, trying to get folks back in the office early, but it really didn't take. People were starting to get more comfortable working from home and having that luxury. And like I said, we went from all office to all remote pretty quickly. And then we started traveling again, probably about the end of the year. I got COVID, I guess would have been in July. Took a little bit of a break from being in the office, obviously, and didn't travel. But once we got into the fourth quarter, I was back out sitting in front of customers because I needed to figure out what was really going on in their world, because our customers, in a large part, they could not shut down. So right. The manufacturers, sure, the large distributors, sure, but the dealers, the independent resellers, they didn't have a choice but to get their people back into work and actually sell equipment. So I wanted to understand that. And so we were one of the few companies that were in front of customers, and it was an interesting experience depending on where you went to. And in some states it changed by county, you know, whether you had to have a mask on, where you're allowed to be face to face, whether you could go out. I've never eaten fast food before, probably in my life, until COVID, because it was the only food that you could get when you were traveling. There's nothing else open in the beginning. So it was painful in some respects, but it did force us to think and do things differently. We've always been trying to get truly to an automated and paperless office. COVID did that. You know, we always wanted to get to have the flexibility of having laptops in every associate's hand. So when they did have, you know, personal issues to deal with, they could work from home and they didn't have to take a, you know, cut and pay by not showing up. So COVID did do some good things. It forced us to do things differently. But it also had some pretty severe impact, obviously, on a whole lot of people. And then supply chain came, and that became, and still is, the biggest pain in trying to originate. And it's made us, you know, forced us to do things differently there as well, as far as financing more used equipment, managing the assets differently than what we have in the past, working more directly with our partners so that they have assets, you know, from our inventory that they could actually leverage and get in front of their customers. So I think the interesting shoe to drop next is going to be when those valuations start to get back to a normalized state like they were in probably 18, 19. And now we have all this equipment new coming in and all this used equipment coming back, and the valuations are not going to be anywhere near what they are right now. So that's what we're modeling with and trying to get in front of, because I think that'll happen over the next 12 to 18 months, at least if you listen to the experts.
Yeah, I mean, that new credit box with those residuals and stuff is going to be daunting. I'm glad you guys are. Doesn't surprise me. You're way ahead of it, but I'd be curious to see, and especially on the imaging side, the effective life use of a product.
Yeah.
You know, if you have something that's urgent, 12, 18 months out, you need to hurry up and get it. Yeah. From a salesperson's perspective, it's perfect because buy now. But
Yeah, the imaging industry is definitely changed for the worse. I don't think that'll come back to the levels that it was pre-COVID. I think it'll come back. I think it'll grow compared to where it is today. We're seeing that. We're seeing it get better, but that industry is really taking it on the chin because again, people were forced to go paperless. And I think as they get back in the office, at least in the corporate campuses, they'll start to utilize paper more obviously than the last 24 months. But I don't know that it comes back to the 18, 19 levels again.
No, I definitely understand that, and that makes complete sense. Um, so also going, through the pandemic, you guys were also going through a merger. So that was another question I want to ask you, because typically you guys have always been the acquirer or the acquirer, not the acquiree. So that's a different side of that. So what was that like, Mike?
It was a really interesting experience. I mean, it wasn't a secret that Ellen's goal was to simplify CIT, divest from all the international business, be a domestic company, a domestic lender, and ultimately, in order for us to really grow, we needed to leverage scale. We needed to get bigger, and that's hard to do when you're divesting so many assets. So the acquisition strategy wasn't a surprise for many folks that were close to CIT. Maybe outside of CIT, it might have been a surprise. And during the due diligence process, we had the opportunity to really spend a lot of time with the people at First Citizens. And I think the one concern that came up early on from my team was that they're the largest family-owned bank in the country. In fact, they own 50% of the shares. And so, people got nervous, this family-owned thing. You've got the Holdings and the Bryants and the Bristows that and their family, leading the bank. And I just took it back to Schwann's. My experience at Schwann's was probably the best professional experience I've ever had. And I believe it was because they were a family-owned organization and they treated their people like family. And the only difficult thing about going through this merger, other than the obvious, was the amount of time that it took to get approvals. We never expected that it was going to take until December of last year to get the approvals. The other side of that coin, though, was that I had the opportunity to meet and drive relationships with people at First Citizens throughout the organization. We couldn't get deep because of rules of engagement, couldn't get deep in the information, but building those relationships was extremely helpful because it's not new to us. We've been diligent in the last 90 days of integration, but we know each other. And again, it's just a really good group of people, smart, thoughtful, not reactionary, long-term thinking. We're a bolt on to their business, so they're really leaving us alone at this point. I have one integration point, that's it's a general ledger. So my business is holistically separate, and they're giving us the opportunity to run the business as if it were our own. So I couldn't ask for anything better. It took longer than what I'd hoped. It took longer than I think everybody was in that bucket, but we got there, and it's been phenomenal.
That's good. At least hopefully some of that stuff's behind you. You don't have to really have the unnecessary travel. And I don't think it's that far of a flight, but still, it's a flight.
Yeah, Raleigh for me is a drive. For whatever reason, Jacksonville doesn't have direct flights to Raleigh anymore, so it's a 6-hour drive. But I don't mind it because, like I said, I just enjoy my time with the folks that I work with up there.
Perfect, and thank you for sharing that. One of the things I also like to focus on with my guest on here is like the trade associations and kind of what they have meant to that individual's like career. So I know I see you at a lot of ELFA events. How has the ELFA impacted your career, Mike?
It's been extremely helpful. It's interesting. I didn't really get involved with the ELFA until USXL, and Jim McGrain. He was adamant that we needed to be involved in the industry, and I didn't find it to be valuable beforehand because I didn't know what the ELFA really did. But once I got involved, wow! I mean, talk about support. Being able to pick up the phone and calling one of your peers just to bounce ideas off of, talk through the pains of what's going on in the industry, the education aspect of it, the lobbying that they do for our industry, the people that are involved. I mean, I had a chance at the last event to really spend some time with Miles, and I have never really had a chance to sit down and talk with Miles. I mean, just a super, super great guy. And, we're all experiencing the same things, and we're all attacking it maybe a little bit differently. So it was great understanding, the people issue, the talent acquisition issue, and how, they're thinking about it and how we were thinking about it. So yeah, it's invaluable for those that aren't involved. That they're really missing it. And I get a large group of my people involved, from relative new hires all the way through to senior managers, to the extent that I can. It's the LFA is invaluable to me.
No, and that association's greatly, helped my career as far as getting right in front of people, or like you said, competition. You'll sit down and pick their brains, and while you guys might just have lost a deal to Leaf, right?
Sure.
It's like you sit there and it's like, well, how are you doing this? And yeah, like Miles is great. He's like, come right out and say, I mean, everyone has their own secret sauce, but people are very open in regards to best practices, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
And kind of another bullet point I wanted to discuss with you, after getting to know you a little bit more from the Executive Roundtable, another ELFA event. I want to talk about like servant leadership, Mike, and kind of what that means to you as an individual.
We might need a little bit more time. So it's an interesting story. At least I think it's interesting. So I first found servant leadership, ironically enough, when I was in Ranger training. And so I spent a year in college. Didn't find it to be useful, and primarily it wasn't useful because I was like an inmate that had escaped a prison. And to give you some context there, my father was a state trooper, my mother was an elementary school teacher, so it was a very disciplined family. And usually you have one parent that disciplines and the other one doesn't. They're the comforter. In my household, it was equal parity. Both disciplined very well. So when I was released to society, I didn't behave probably the way that I needed to. So I joined the Army, and in basic training, I fell in love with the discipline. I didn't mind drill sergeants yelling at me. It was a natural feeling, quite honestly, because that's just how I was raised. So fortunately for me, I excelled to the point where I was selected to go to Ranger School. And I'll never forget, and just to give you a little bit of background on Ranger School, the way that they attack it is they drive you to the lowest common denominator. And the primary way they do that is they don't allow you to sleep. You're not allowed to eat very much. And you're moving constantly. So you're on for 4 days straight, carrying 70 pounds on your back. At that time, we were in the mountains of Dahlonega training in North Carolina, 4 days, and then you got a mandatory 4 hours of sleep. And so on my first mission as a leader of the team, and again, there's no rank when you go to Ranger School. There's, whether you're an officer or enlisted, it doesn't matter, rank comes off. But I had the opportunity to lead this team, and after 4 hours, my team was getting some rest, and I was about to get some rest until the instructor came over to me. The Ranger instructor came over to me and said, "Jones, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Sergeant, I got to get some rest. I've been going for 4 days. I just want to get my 4 hours." He said, has every one of your soldiers changed their socks and powdered their feet? And honestly, I don't know. That's your responsibility. And I looked at him, and I'm the leader, right? And my responsibility is to go around to each of my soldiers and take their boots off, powder their feet, and put new socks on. And he said, absolutely. Your number one responsibility is to take care of your people. If your people can't complete the mission because their feet are messed up, that's on you. And that's when I stopped and said, that's serving others. And through the years, I've had so many examples of leaders that I've worked with. Alfred Schwanz is another one who just really pounded, you got to take care of your people will take care of your customers will take care of you. It doesn't get any easier than that. That's leadership. So over the years, I just became a student of servant leadership. Anything that Greenleaf wrote, I would read. And anything that anybody wrote on servant leadership, I would read. Any leader that I could listen to on a podcast or, I would listen to, and still do today. And very, very passionate about pushing that servant leadership down through my team. And it's not comfortable for people because people think that, servant leadership, well, it's religious. Well, it not necessarily. Or servant leadership, servant leaders are soft. I've been accused of a lot of things. Jesse, soft is not one of them. So,
I was gonna say I would never call you that. Like, nope.
so and fortunately, I've surrounded myself with servant leaders, and today, my team is 100% focused on taking care of their people so that they can take care of our customers, and it just makes it a good environment to work in, and it's not always perfect. Um, there are times where you have to be an autocrat. You just have to make decisions. There are times that bullets are coming at you. You don't have a chance to really collaborate. But the foundation, from my point of view, of leadership needs to be serve and serve others. And you probably see it on my board behind me. It's probably hard to read.
Yeah, no, I just noticed it when you pointed it out.
Yeah, yeah. I do all calls with the entire group every month, and every month, I talk about what it means to be a servant leader, what you could be doing differently, and close every call with proud to serve. Proud to serve has been my close for 25 years because my job is to serve them.
Wow, that's fantastic, Mike, and thank you. And honestly, like, this world could use more leaders like yourself that actually have that methodology and everything else. So that's fantastic. And what I'm curious of is when that Sherm guy was giving that presentation at the executive roundtable, if organizations are built like the way that you've done it, like what is their turnover compared to normal organizations?
Yeah, it's interesting because I see Johnny's commercials on the news now, and I never even noticed him before. He was a great speaker. I'd like to believe that the turnover is less. If you look at our turnover, it's high compared to what it was a year ago. There's no question about that. We're not impacted, but it's certainly significantly less than what's going on in Jacksonville. And I connect with leaders here in Jacksonville, and they're running pretty close to 30% turnover rate, and in other areas as well. And our rate's not anywhere near 30%. So I do know that it has impact, but with 654 people, it's sometimes hard to get that message to all of them. And some of them don't want to embrace servant leadership, both the managers and leaders, and sometimes the individual associate. So I can't imagine why, but I haven't figured that one out just yet.
I think it's just humans, psychology. Hard to judge sometimes.
That wasn't my strong suit. That's why that's why I got a degree in accounting. And numbers to me make sense. Sometimes people, not so much.
So I ask everyone who comes on here, Mike, to give a little fun fact about themselves. Anything you'd like to share?
That's an interesting one.
It is recorded, so just throwing that out there.
I'll keep it clean. Probably the one thing that people wouldn't think of, even the people that have worked with me for a long time, I've got this unbelievable dedication and devotion to surfing. I just love surfing. I've been surfing my entire life. Well, not my entire life, for most of my life. I've surfed all over the country, all over the world, and it's the one place where I can literally be by myself and reflect, because I found that reflection is the one of many fuels that gives back. You got to take time to sit down and just think about, how the day went, how the week went, and sitting on a board in the ocean is the one thing that I truly embrace. And one of the reasons that I'm in Florida, because now you can do it 12 months out of the year. Jersey was a little tough.
Yeah, Jersey's tough. I mean, that's kind of one of those things I've always wanted to try. For me, it's like the embarrassment of getting this on a board and then trying to get up, and it's like, can no one watch while I practice this, please?
The beauty of Florida as well, you can go out during the winter and on most days not bump into many people. A lot of sharks, but not a lot of people. Just need a big board. Big board's fine. Well, thanks. What's been the best destination that you've ever surfed? I love Mexico. There's a place north of Puerto Vallarta called Punta Mita, and it's a little town, a couple blocks wide, a few blocks long, and the people there are just amazing. The food's incredible. I've been there dozens of times. It's the most consistent wave, not big, but it's just a great destination, and it's in the middle of nowhere.
Perfect. Well, Mike, I really appreciate your time today, sir. Thank you again for giving me, the time to actually interview you here.